Welcome back. This is part 4 of Sibylla's story. Let's continue the journey with the new chapter titled True Nobility.
Work for the field far reaches, the laborer's hands are few. The world's great need beseeches, there is something for thee to do. Oh, linger not, idly dreaming, the golden moments speed, while the sun's broad rays are streaming, the summons to labor heed. St. A. Stowe. The haut volets are today in a quandary. A highly gifted man has been invited to deliver his lecture entitled The Shady Side of Modern Culture. His name is distinguished and his theme an unusual one. When one is daily satiated with honey, a little mustard or caviar is desirable. The large hall is crowded. There is not an empty seat in the crimson plush chairs of the circle. All are eager to hear from his own lips this renowned professor's views in behalf of the working classes, as they had been promulgated in his interesting, original books. He enters and takes his place behind the speaker's desk, his great full eyes sweeping over the audience with searching glance. There before him sit those who pass their time in worldly dissipation and sensual enjoyments. There they are, in elegant gowns, fashionable hats, and velvet wraps. There they sit, with happy, contented faces. What matters the rain to them behind their closed windows? In long rows before the hall stand their expensive equipages, for their delicate feet may only tread inlaid floors. What a different picture the speaker has witnessed in his intercourse with the poor. What a contrast! Here luxury, there beggary. He gazes as though he would penetrate the hearts of his hearers. Then he recollects the time has arrived for him to begin to speak. For in one brief hour this assemblage must separate to dress for a party, or they will be too late. If his lips are somewhat bitterly compressed, his heart is even more so when he thinks, "They have little time for the poor, and I must embrace it, to drive, if possible, an entering wedge into their consciences." With earnest tone he begins, "To the especial glory of Christianity, which we may here designate the kingdom of God, belongs, after its inherent nature, the outward exercise of its sublime calling, that one dominant, universal, regenerating influence which it exerts not only on solitary individuals, but on the social life of communities, upon all mutual action in the struggle for gain among men. Christianity is not doctrine alone, but histories, and histories of awakened life, and a life indeed that is designed for the cure and regeneration of the old faith." Then the speaker showed in a few brief touches the progress of this kingdom during the past 1,000 years, which was still far from its end, having to call forth from sin many who were reluctant to be embraced within its fold. Then he reverted particularly to the situation in Berlin. How many complaints were heard everywhere over the condition of affairs in the city. But he did not wish to offer denunciations like those who uttered it only to shake the dust from their feet of this great Sodom-like city and then depart out of it. He desired to present unbiased facts gathered after an unprejudiced, critical examination of the lower classes in order to awaken sympathy in their behalf. Numbers should speak, statistics and police reports testify. We shall not follow the lecturer step by step, and only extract a statement relating to the condition of Berlin tenements. In the basements are 11,985 homes, containing 55,942 occupants. Dwellings of 4 or more stories in height number 7,260, with 31,699 inmates. Besides these, 87,641 people live in underground cellars. What wretched abodes for body and soul! But further, there are in Berlin 6,228 abodes consisting of one room, each occupied by 6 people. 4,041 rooms with 7 occupants each, 2,203 with 8 occupants each, 1,160 with 9 occupants, 508 with 10 occupants, 196 with 11 occupants, 65 with 12 occupants, 43 with from 13 to 20 occupants in each room. And the picture these numbers reveal, added the speaker, also shows that 13,771 people have no kitchens. They cook, live, sleep, eat, and often work in the same room, winter and summer. In the same room where a young life awakens to the light of the world, frequently lies the dead body of another, while the daily employment is pursued in the midst of this death and life. How can such family life prosper?
But enough. We shall pass over that part of the address in which the speaker begged the assistance and personal services of the rich. One fact may, however, be stated. He imputed to women of all ranks a great part of the blame for the low, depraved condition of many of their own sex. Your love of luxury, he said, your expensive apparel, your diversions and pleasures have eaten downward like poison. Naturally, every woman imitates those who occupy a grade above her. Instead of seeking to do noble deeds, women of influence and position look scornfully upon poor, fallen girls in their sin and shame. And here it is worthwhile not to look with resignation for the strong rolling effects of an avalanche, but to work, with consideration and hope, to succor and rescue where this is yet possible. At length the professor's discourse was ended. It had been followed throughout with breathless interest, even with agitation and emotion. An hour later we find the greater part of this audience assembled at the residence of Councillor Wurtzel. Most of them had cast off with their garments the effects of the lecture. They were now in full evening dress. But what a welcome theme for conversation the address afforded! "I must confess," remarked Lady von Herbig as she reclined upon a luxurious satin divan, "I find it rather disagreeable to have such dark pictures presented to us. What if one should dream of them at night?" "Yes, such men usually apply their colors strongly," said Herr von Lenxering. "They are so regardless of the highly strung nerves of the people before them." A languishing glance of approbation from Lady von Herbig rewarded the young man, while she lightly fanned herself. "I do not think it is so bad as he represents," said Lady von Wurtzel, the hostess. "Certainly one hears and sees nothing of such misery." "And I maintain," interrupted a lady who rustled in satin, "that it is of little use to arouse desires in such people which they have never felt. One must always remember that they have been very differently reared from those in our class." "There lies a democratic sentiment," piped an elderly, prim-looking gentleman in nasal tones. "It only excites the rabble to pay them so much attention, and gives them a claim to offer complaints. And as for the class of women for whom he interceded, and whom he would have assisted, there is nothing better for them than the whipping post." "What do they want of us?" began another society woman. "We have so much to do already. The obligations of our everyday life are so exhausting. I am convinced that the majority of these so-called poor women do not have the 10th part of what is required from us. Our homes, our social duties, our position. Oh, we have duties to fulfill of which these creatures have the remotest idea." "Yes, indeed, that is true," said Wolfe softly. "People become hard through voluptuousness. Visiting becomes duty, dress and finery important affairs." "You are right," responded Arnold von Karing, who stood near. "I am disgusted with this masquerade, but I can do nothing either here in high Olympus or yonder in the world." "Papa gives annually a large sum to the Society for the Improvement of the Poor," added a young woman. "If everyone did the same, the need would not be worth talking about." "The Nurembergers hang no one, then they have them," retorted Arnold sarcastically, but the fair maiden did not understand the allusion. Sibylla had remained silent until now. In spirit, she was in sympathy with wretched rooms in which 8 or 10 human beings were penned together amid life and death, and she asked herself whether art would exercise its heavenly calling in such places, whether it would elevate and console. Her nature was too practical to answer this question affirmatively, and she was too noble to assert it against the truth. Wolf approached her. "Fräulein Sibylla, what effect has this much-talked-about discourse had on you?" "It has exasperated me," she replied. "May I ask why?" "Yes, I will tell you. I cannot bear to have such misery pictured to me when I am not able to alleviate it. I believe every word is true. The statistics and the professor's honest face affirm this. But tell me, what is the use of presenting such horrible scenes to me, scenes that make me shudder against my will? I love the blue sky and the sunshine." "Would it not be possible to help?" asked Wolf. "On that point the learned professor has not clearly spoken. Evidently he knows no way. But that is what these gentlemen do. They thunder down upon us poor sinners and then go their way." "One might call upon him and ask him direct questions," said Wolf. "Oh, you are not in earnest, Herr Erikson. He would send us on the street with a package of tracts and say I must wear the dress of a deaconess and wash all the old women's feet. No, we are both, honestly speaking, much too great ease-lovers for that." Sibylla was right. Impressions had been made on Wolf's heart, but he did not have the moral courage to put them to the test. It is terrible to know that 20 or 30,000 women and girls come to Berlin annually to seek work. Police reports confirm this. "I ask you, what is to become of them?" said another aristocratic dame. "Most of them find what they seek," replied the wife of a rich manufacturer. "My husband employs in his factory alone over 600 girls, and their work leaves nothing further to wish for. Their labors are light, and they can earn, if they are very diligent, nearly $4 weekly." "Oh, I am glad to hear that," exclaimed Lady von Kaiser. "Early this morning the manager of an employment bureau called upon me to beg situations for respectable girls. She has had them under her personal supervision since their confirmation. When they are 14 years old and ready to help themselves, she finds great difficulty in procuring positions for them. Couldn't some of these girls enter your husband's factory?"
"My dear," replied the manufacturer's wife, graciously drawing nearer to the speaker, "I'm sorry to say to you, send us no respectable girls. Those in our factory are all fallen." "But do you make no efforts in their behalf?" exclaimed the kind-hearted Baroness, affrighted. "Could you not, in your position, remedy such a condition of affairs?" "Thank you," heartily laughed the informant. "What would you have me do? I told you they are all fallen." The lecture was also being discussed by the younger people. They talked with great animation and resolved to take action immediately. Lady von Karing was elected chairman, and it was decided not to separate before something was determined upon. "Our young folks," she said, "have today for the first time had presented to them a glimpse of misery of which previously they had no conception. With susceptible, tender hearts, they wish to help with all their youth and strength. They declare they will not enter upon dancing until something has been decided." Her words appeared to give universal satisfaction among the company. Today a fresh breeze had passed over the stagnant water, but a few older heads were doubtfully shaken. "Doing and repenting? No, no," echoed another. "We must first make the necessary inquiries and gain correct information of the affair." "We must deliberate slowly," suggested a third. "When we meet again we can decide further." "Only let there be nothing rash," said a thoughtful voice. "Enthusiasm is no fish commodity which one pickles for a year," came from the rear of the room. Scarcely anyone heard the remark, but Sibylla writhed beneath it, having recognized Dr. Uhlhardt's voice. Oh, how repulsive it was for her to think that she was in accord with him in so many opinions. Had not the very same words entered her own mind that he had just uttered?
The young people seized the word with enthusiasm and became increasingly animated. Soon the opposing element was silenced. Resolution after resolution was passed. "We will hold a lottery." This was lost. "A bazaar will not be profitable, as there have been so many recently." "How would a masquerade ball do?" suggested a young officer. "Admittance $2. That would ensure a handsome amount." "No, no, we have just danced for the benefit of poor starving families," interposed a lady. A lively discussion followed in which the object to do good was lost sight of in the endeavor to combine pleasure with it. They from whom the idea of doing good had emanated had never dreamed that they could be deviated in such a way. Lady Von Karing still held the chair. Finally, it was decided to have tableaux in a hall which should accommodate a large circle of acquaintances. Admission tickets should be issued at a high rate, and surely no one would refuse to be interested in tableaux. "What do you think will really be the expense involved by those who participate in this affair?" Wolfe asked, turning to Sibylla. "Not less than $20 or $30 apiece," she replied. "If this amount were only offered now for the good cause, we would be taking a speedy step forward." "Ah, but there would be no enjoyment in that," maintained Sibylla. "Oh, please let them have this pittance of joy. Don't you see how delightfully they all amuse themselves in the very anticipation?" "And the unfortunates for whom all this will be done will never be thought of again?" "Of course not," laughed Sibylla, "and I, too, shall hear no more of them, for I cannot help them. Happy is he who can forget when he cannot alleviate." But what says Herr Bolton, the wool merchant, all this while? Standing up and clearing his throat, he announces in a loud voice, "Such a laudable undertaking as the one under consideration deserves the cooperation of every worthy person. In view of the expense attendant upon the project, allow me to place in your hand, Madam President, the sum of $50. Please, please, no thanks," he added graciously. "I know it, and where these come from there will be more to follow." Around Sibylla's mouth a scornful smile played. Wolfe observed it and said, "He seems to be a very worthy person." "Yes, his worthiness bores me to death," replied Sibylla. The conversation continued upon the working classes, social questions, etc. The subject must be an important one to have taken such a hold upon the participants. Pros and cons were advanced briskly. In general, everyone seemed to take a pride in the discussion. Wolfe said very little. It affected him painfully to see these serious topics treated by those present so lightly and superficially. "There is a refractory spirit in the common people," said Bolton petulantly. "They no longer obey, but only make claims." "Well," interrupted Linksering, who was persevering in his endeavors to converse with Olga, "where are the laws and penalties for such actions? Let them be administered strictly instead of so carelessly." "Oh, I wish the speaker himself could be laid hold of and kept strictly, so that for a year he might not deliver his falsehoods to poor Olga." Wolfe's glance rested on Olga. She was so young and appeared so infatuated by that flatterer. If she only had a mother to warn her before it was too late. Olga's condition grieved Wolfe inexpressibly, but he made no reply to Sibylla, who looked at him with surprise. "Here in the city," remarked the old Baron von Karing, "people are worse off than elsewhere. They hear so much about man's rights and their claims that they make demands which formerly they never dreamed of." "But should these demands be wholly ignored, even if they go beyond the limit?" interposed Lady von Kaiser. "Certainly, entirely so," emphasized an old excellence. "Rest assured, from my personal experience, the common people have everything they need. But there is real want existing. Oh, maybe in isolated cases, but what they do not have they never miss. This talking to them only gives knowledge of their deprivations." "And you must not compare the lower classes with us," said Arnold at this juncture. "They indeed have eyes and ears as we have, but they see and hear very differently." "Yes, indeed," flustered Lady von Herbig. "These working people cannot feel the same as we do. They never have great thoughts." Wolf had listened with increasing indignation. At last he said, "I beg pardon, but history and experience teach otherwise. Stein, for example, in one of his essays, says that nobility is not acquired through birth, but by merit. The most beautiful period of German history knew nothing of hereditary descent. Archbishop Williger von Mainz was the son of a poor woman, and Duke Billing of Saxony was the son of a possessor of 7 hides of land. Please also recall Fox, Livingstone, Luther, Neander, and many others. They were all poor children." "Oh, well, I grant," said the hostess, "that here and there such examples may be found. And when any such child of the common people does a great deed, we are very willing to overlook the misfortune of his birth." "Misfortune of birth!" Wolf arose and stepped backward a few paces, his hand reaching toward a chair as if he would hurl it in defense. "But, madam," said the sharp voice of a young lieutenant, "is it not true that the fact of being one of such children must be very uncomfortable? When innate crudeness comes in conflict with natural refinement, the process of passing from one to the other is best settled by us in complete withdrawal." Some laughed, others looked embarrassed by these rude words. It had become very still when Wolf said in a clear, calm voice, "I am not the man to remain silent under such aspersion. I am a working man's child. My father was a fisherman and lived by the labor of his hands, as I have also done." These words flashed over the assemblage like lightning. Silence fell everywhere. Many approved Wolf's words, but waited to see their effect upon others. He stood there calmly, while a triumphant expression played over Dr. Uhlhardt's face. Suddenly, the second terror was far worse than the first. Suddenly Sibylla arose, walked toward Wolf, extended her hand, and said in a clear, kindly tone, "You are perfectly right." But the working man's child did not compromise himself. Instead of cavalierly kissing the proffered hand, he drew himself up to an equal and simply said, "Thank you."
This marks the end of Chapter 10. We now move into the next chapter of Sibylla's story, titled "The Enemy Sows Tares."
Whether 'tis evil or whether 'tis good, done in the day or in darkness of night, even the thoughts that do lie in the heart, all shall be brought to the glare of the light. Translated from Freidank. It had been a blow in the face to good society. The misfortune of Wolf's low birth might have been condoned, but the fact of his having so openly and even defiantly claimed it as a distinction could not be passed over. The affair, therefore, paralyzed many a mother who had been quietly laying plans to capture the young man. Who would not prefer a pleasant young son-in-law to an old blasé standing on golden feet? But this Wolf was discovered to stand only on his own. Lady von Karing was reproached with great venality by society at large. She had introduced him as well as protected him under her powerful name, and she had even intimated that he was a wealthy Austrian. Beneath this fine showing, this one and that one had blushed when she thought of him, and how heartily and urgently all, even men, had coveted his presence. But now he must be made to feel his true position. Of course, there were some far-sighted ones who looked into the future and were not disposed to decry a physician, and there were others who recognized the nobility of Wolf's behavior. But what could these few do in the face of the great majority? Conformity to fashionable usage is a terrible tyrant, but nonconformity is a still greater one. Ericsson was poor, his humble origin evident, therefore he was doomed. Naturally, they were too polite to ignore him immediately, but he must occupy a different position. But their sufferance Wolf did not desire. His manhood was aroused, a manhood which refused to bow down before these people. What had they given him that he should render tribute? He wished to tear himself away from them, to turn his back upon them, to require nothing from them as if they were beneath him. Only one pang entered his soul. If he were banished from society, there would be no opportunity to see Sibylla again. And yet she had evidently sought to encourage him. How she had prevailed upon her lofty-minded mamma to send him an invitation was more than he could guess. Besides, the Baroness von Kaiser also recognized him most amiably, as well as the Carings, for while Lady von Caring was fortified with great pride, she and her son did not forget that the fisherman's son had saved 2 valuable lives in their family. Elsewhere, the doors were closed to Wolf, and he no longer craved to have them open. But society was still a friendless circle to him. The ill usage a man experiences sharpens his understanding, but embitters the heart. Wolf began to be very unamiable and to look at everything with hypercritical eyes. When one stands in a dark corner, he can see all the better what goes on in the light. Now Wolf observed keenly that fashionable society intercourse was devoid of love and favor, and that while everyone carried himself finely and courtly, no one had the courage to appear just as he really was. A large part of the young people were young without youth. What sounded fresh and bright was tiresome and stereotyped, first to slay, then artfully to restore to life. Where had his eyes been hitherto that they only saw these people surrounded with glory? Now he observed for the first time that empty heads sat by full tables, and that while the pearls that adorned the lovely forms were genuine, the hair was false. He saw and heard even more. He was convinced that Herr von Lenxering ridiculed the inexperienced Olga. At the same time he was weaving a web around the rich maiden's love. "Have you caught the goldfish yet?" a lieutenant was heard to ask von Lenxering. "It is bitten, but I shall let it wriggle a while," was the coarse reply. "Take care it doesn't escape." Just then Wolf was observed standing near. "Psst, the fisherman's son," laughed the lieutenant. Wolf controlled himself. He indeed was a fisherman's son, but these gentlemen should take heed lest the fisherman's son let the fish out of the net. He approached Olga von Steinfels. In his bold, frank way, he said earnestly, "Fräulein, beware of Herr von Lenxering. He means no good to you."
The style of his warning was not commendable, but it scarcely deserved the treatment it received. The young woman blushed deeply, and without a word turned her back upon Wolf. Dr. Uhlhardt had seen the proceeding. Perhaps he divined the cause. He enjoyed interpreting things falsely. It was now only a short time before all sorts of unseemly and regardless things were repeated, which Herr Erikson had perpetrated. Many believed too readily these buzzing rumors in the air as confirmations that low birth and low inclinations went hand in hand. It is marvelous how like a serpent creeps a wicked, calumniating word from place to place. One cannot catch it, but the poisonous breath it spreads around an unfortunate person is evident. And Wolf soon perceived this venom without knowing whence it came. Always earnest, he devoted himself to his studies. True, the ideal of his professional calling was removed far from him. So demoralizing had life been to him on account of his experiences with the want of integrity and human love, that his ambition to become a celebrated physician in order to relieve suffering by his skill had been dispelled. The ideas which formerly animated him were now repulsive and stood like good spirits lamenting in the distance. Besides this, a formidable enemy approached Wolf. It was materialism. He could not reconcile the intuition which science gave him with the fundamental principles of Christianity as he had learned them at home. He gave to materialism, which raises its head high to the student of medicine, a sacred, prominent place second to Christianity. If he had only possessed the true spirit of the latter, it would have comforted and calmed him, but it was only a vague, empty shadow. God, Christianity, immortality gradually became to Wolfe vain, hollow words. While he still battled for them against the advancing enemy and only desired to know the truth, he was continually entangled by them. Science had not informed the young, vigorous student how to interpret those deep watchwords in the controversy. Olga von Steinfels sat in her room. She had now been 2 years from boarding school and into society. As an uncontaminated lady, she had returned to her father's home. Childhood had been outgrown. Why had she pursued so many hundred studies? Why had she continued French and English so long, if not to show their utility in society? And yet a good genius had folded its pinions around Olga in order that the allurements of pleasure and the fascination of wealth might not harm the susceptible maiden. This good genius had been a love for Wolfe. He had been the first to pay her marked attention in the days of his glory, but she had been pressed back by the circle of her associates on account of a natural timidity, and they had praised and monopolized the one whose manly beauty and agreeable friendliness had been so pleasant to her. How she envied them! Soon she had builded airy, fanciful castles in which Wolfe the king and herself the queen were enthroned. True, he had given her little encouragement for these fantasies, but Olga never knew how much she really owed to the fisherman's son. He was the star upon which she gazed, and the miserable baubles she had formerly admired faded away utterly. She was, for the most part, like many girls of her age, from youth accustomed to think herself the center of the universe, to adore externals more than to discern true merit, to enjoy herself with the happy and to shed a tear with the sorrowing, to pass her days as best she might and look upon the childish frivolities of life as its highest aims. Today, Sibylla has called upon Olga. They are not intimate friends, but the fair hostess is not wholly unable to conceal from her guest her hopes and happiness. Sibylla is too polite to question her very closely, but she herself has thought Wolfe had shown recently much solicitation for Olga, and Dr. Uhlhardt had also intimated the same to her. Suddenly, however, she has become so cool and restrained that little Olga is wholly frightened. When Sibylla had returned home, she said to herself, "What is it to me? He can do as he pleases, but if he really loves this superficial girl, he is not the man I have believed him to be. And as for Olga, well, when one feels deeply, it is difficult to express a sentiment. But what does it matter to me?" Some time later, Dr. Uhlhardt called upon Sibylla. He talked of various things and finally mentioned Wolfe. Being careful to defend him, he at the same time related so many wicked and disagreeable stories about him that one so bright as Sibylla could not fail to be impressed, and the doctor knew her well enough to discern just what displeased her. He described how Wolfe suddenly evinced a great interest in the lower classes, how he loafed in beer saloons in order to acquaint himself with the workingmen who specially pleased him. He regretted Wolfe had little consideration and that he went so far as to ridicule those with whom he had formerly associated. In this way he dropped the poison in Sibylla's ear. She was silent. At length she silenced him with, "And why, pray, do you tell me all this? It interests me very little to hear of people's failings." The doctor bit his lips, but why did his glance pierce Sibylla so keenly? Had he made a good stroke, or had he made a fool of himself? He feared the latter, but a point had been gained, perhaps, and he knew it was necessary to take many tricks to win a game. Lady von Steinfels sat holding a letter in her hand. It had come by post, without seal or signature. The writer declared his desire to call her attention to the fact that Wolfe Eriksson was paying court to her daughter, and not in vain. He had observed this himself, as well as heard it spoken of in many places. He therefore felt under obligation to inform the mother by direct communication. At first, Lady von Steinfels threw the letter indignantly aside, feeling that an anonymous letter was unworthy of notice. But after some conversation with her daughter, she discovered that her unknown correspondent knew more about her family affairs than she did, for Olga stood before her and with hot tears protested she loved Wolf and that any opposition from her mother would render her unspeakably miserable. "Child, child," said Lady von Steinfels soothingly, "you are too young to know the meaning of love. Only believe me when I assure you that what we imagine to be love at first soon passes off and is nothing but a dream or fleeting fancy. In a little while you will laugh over this and look upon it as a folly."
Olga turned scornfully away. She had not been educated on a mother's heart, and she had scarcely been out of boarding school before her young soul had been filled with love's dreams. Her mother was no friend in whom she might confide. Olga had never been taught to trust her, and how could she expect this inexperienced, intoxicated girl to please her or to obey her with a willing heart? But the mother's heart was bitter. An inner voice warningly asked, "Why have you given over your only child to strangers? Was not your home large enough for both?" Alas, there was no room there. Social duties, a husband's position, left no time to look after my daughter. I did what thousands of others have done, gave her the advantages of the best boarding school and the most expensive teachers. Now I want to be her friend. Oh, why should I be treated so? She mourned. Olga continued steadfast in her love and trust. But how long? When she found that Wolf no longer gave her any attention, when she heard nothing but evil reports of his behavior, she confessed that her mother was right. It was the young soul's first disappointment, and she was bitter and hard in her conclusions. Olga asked, "What is the use of living? Why dress and go out into company where everybody deceives and lies? What should she do there? Lie and deceive also?" A torturing pang shot through her inmost soul during these days, when she was forced to accept the position as the best wisdom. Well is it for us that the future is hidden. What Dr. Uhlhardt had repeated was not wholly untrue. Wolf had really desired to become acquainted with the so-called common people. He wished to discover whether they possessed, under perhaps a rude exterior, a better kernel than those among higher classes. Perhaps he did not take the best method to secure his aim, especially since Uhlhardt, who had proffered his services as companion, was no good guide. Wolf had a horror for this man, and yet he could not shake off his influence, an influence that Uhlhardt exerted over many with demoniacal power. Wolf found as little of what he sought among the working class as he had in aristocratic circles, and it was very agreeable to him when one of his instructors strongly advised him to spend his third year in some other place. He desired to go away from Sibylla, as his affection for her continued to increase, and he had no reason to believe it was reciprocated. What she had approved so openly on that eventful evening concerned the subject, not the person. She was among a circle of acquaintances who gave her perfect liberty of action. She had openly enough, during the latter months, shown Wolf that she asked nothing from him, as she only vindicated him on account of the opposition against him. Wolf was too honorable to ask her a direct question, for he had no home to offer, and as yet no prospect of one. Still, for a time longer, life played itself away, until now it was summer, and people were enjoying themselves at the various watering places. If one met an acquaintance on the streets of Berlin, it was a source of as great a surprise as if he had met him on the bay at Naples. Then Wolf packed up his traps and started off likewise. This time not homeward. He had no desire to go there, and all communication with his relatives had been confined to an occasional letter. He would first wander through Thuringia, then go to Jena. When he went to take leave of Lady von Herbig, he found she had gone. Uhlhardt had given him a later day for her departure, but it was well enough so, as it made his own leaving easier.
Wolf had learned many things in Berlin. His knowledge, his intuition were richer, and his understanding had been formed. He had also unlearned much. He had not become actually wicked, for his manly heart revolted against dishonesty, but many of his noble aspirations had been wrested from him with icy grasp. He longed for the good things of earth, but he was not happy, for his soul was not satisfied. So he went to Jena. I behold a youth whose true inner self excites my love, but I fear he is only too apt to swim with the current of time. He has given his rudder into the hands of one who will prove unfaithful, and his frail boat will not be able to stem the tide, but will obey the guidance of its destroyer. Ulhart accompanied Wolf to the railroad station. When he had disappeared from view, he rubbed his hands gleefully and said, "Now, with regard to Fraulein Sibylla, it shall be out of sight, out of mind, and I will take care she will learn what a vulgar peasant had attracted her attention."
This marks the end of Chapter 11. We now move into the next chapter of Sibylla's story, titled Life is But a Vapor.
God is in the Orient, God is in the Occident. In the northern, southern lands rests the peace of his own hands. Goethe. Let us return again to our acquaintances by the seashore. The sea rolls on in eternal change as before, the days following one another in its ebb and flow, and a day will come which to one of the dwellers there shall be the last. Captain Nielsen, the old traveler, stands this morning in his usual place. He has grown older, and he gazes with increasing solicitude upon Ingeborg, his sweet daughter, the solitary jewel that remains to him. His wife and 3 lovely children, years agone, wandered pale and wan, with hectic flush upon their faces, until one after another had passed away and been carried to the silent churchyard. That was long ago, and little Ingeborg knew nothing about them except what her old nurse, Johanna, had told her. The happy child did not miss them, but she often spoke of them and believed they were in heaven. Once, during a violent storm, she had been looked for and found on the beach, unwilling to return home. "Oh, let me go! When it lightens, the heavens open, and I will look in to see my mother and sisters." Thus she seemed to live with the dead whom she had never known. She was her father's darling, but was left much alone. After every hemorrhage she declined perceptibly. She will yield to it, her father thought, but as the days and years passed, the small, wan face, the hectic flush, the brilliant eye, all reminded him of those who had gone before. Must the father part with his last child? He had hoped for Wolf's return, with skill acquired at the great Berlin colleges, to heal her daughter. But Wolf tarried long, and this year did not return home at all. Then the captain went to Hamburg to consult an eminent physician there. "I ought to see your daughter," said the doctor, "but from what you have told me, I think she should be taken to a milder climate. Could you not find it convenient to pass the winter at Cairo?" Why not? Captain Nielsen had abundant financial means and was accustomed to travel. It was entirely feasible. Indeed, it had seemed strange to remain so long in this quiet haven, away from the bustling world. So he immediately began to make his arrangements in Hamburg for the journey, and a few days later returned home. He has just made his plans known to Ingeborg. She scarcely realizes them at first. Once she might have been eager to go, but now her head droops. "Oh, father, is it really necessary? We have no friends there, but that is no matter." "Don't be foolish, darling. An old seaman like me doesn't need friends to acquaint him with strange places. You have spoiled me here, and I ought to go east again." Then Ingeborg began to realize what she should lose. "I cannot live without the sea, or Mother Esther. They will both miss me so much." "Ah, what is that to your health?" Ingeborg was silent.
What made the journey most undesirable she would reveal to no one. In fact, she scarcely desired to be well again. Heaven with its blessedness seemed as near and certain to her as the Christ-gift tree from an open door to the children in an adjoining room. And now she was even filled with regret that she must wait still longer. She rested her head on her hands, and all the glories of the New Jerusalem passed through her mind. Here the sky was gray, full of sin and clouds. There all was brightness and purity and beauty, and her young heart went out in longings for that home of rest and peace. Then another picture presented itself to the weary child. Here was her old father, by whom she loved to be, and must remain. No, no, she would henceforth fix her eyes upon the earth. Continually beholding the beaming splendor of eternity made the present, with its duties, grow obscure and worthless. "Father, when shall we start?" she asked with soft voice. "Everything is ready, my dear child, and we shall start in a fortnight. Johanna will care for the house in our absence, and we must begin to consider what to take with us and what to leave behind." As her father seemed unusually wearied, Ingeborg brought him a pillow and said lovingly, "Won't you take a little sleep, dear father? You have not been accustomed to travel and arrived home so late last night." "Well, darling, I don't usually sleep in the mornings, but I will indulge myself today, for I am very tired. But I will sleep regularly when we get to Egypt, God willing." Ingeborg was passing lightly from the room when she heard her name called. "Dear, you have not read to me for several evenings, and I can't go to sleep so well without it. I missed it so much in Hamburg. Read me something." Ingeborg opened her Bible and read from the 21st chapter of Revelation the following words: "And I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth are passed away, and the sea is no more. And I saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, made ready as a bride adorned for her husband. And I heard a great voice out of the throne, saying, Behold, the tabernacle of God is with men, and he shall dwell with them, and they shall be his people, and God himself shall be with them, and be their God. And he shall wipe away every tear from their eyes, and death shall be no more, neither shall there be mourning, nor crying, nor pain any more. The first things have passed away. And he that sitteth on the throne said, Behold, I make all things new. And he said, Write, for these words are faithful and true. Thank you, my child. Now go, I am so tired, murmured the father. Some minutes later, Ingeborg looked into the room, and her father was sleeping, but his head had fallen, and she went to adjust the pillow. Her hand trembled, for the face she touched was icy cold. Looking more closely, she was seized by a spasm of terror. "Johanna! Johanna!" she cried. The old nurse came quickly and uttered a loud shriek. Captain Nielsen was dead. He had taken that long journey whence none one returns. After Ingeborg had recovered from the pain of the first shock, she felt strange and solemn. There before her lay lifeless he who only a few hours previously had talked cheerfully about his future plans, and who had the strongest love and tenderest care for his only child. Stiff, motionless, cold, oh, how cold! But Ingeborg looked less upon the shell. She would gladly have seen where the soul tarried. Once, only when she was a child, she had been present at the death of a person, and had imagined heaven's door would open in the separation of soul and body, and she might be permitted to glimpse therein. But the great secret had passed over her, on the threshold of which she stood so ready. She looked at her own transparent hands, and said joyfully, I shall soon follow. How softly my father must have slept away. He had passed through the eternal gates, his last thoughts on the New Jerusalem, only to awake to find himself there.
Poor little Ingeborg, and you are still here. He desired to travel with you. Why did he not take you with him? Ingeborg folded her hands. Dear Lord, what shall I do here? Behold, I am alone. Come thou and help me. Ah, poor weary child, thy father's life work is ended, therefore he can rest, but yours is not yet finished. Everybody was astonished to hear of Captain Nielsen's sudden death, but no idle talk was indulged over his body. The lowly dwellers by the sea were earnest, and they looked upon the frail child with a sympathy far-reaching and sincere. Our life hangs upon a thread, but God holds the thread, said Mother Esther. Ingeborg bowed. Her life's thread lay in the same hand who knew what was best for her, and she could lovingly say, Thy will be done. I would gladly go in this way, continued Mother Esther. No lingering illness. How is it with you, my brother? She said, turning to the body, but the lips remained closed, and she added softly, I shall soon know. Time passed. Ingeborg watched the sea dreamily and saw the waves come and go. Whither did they go? Rolled they to eternity? Why did they not take the sick child with them when she longed to be landed at the port of eternal life? Ingeborg did not go to Egypt. What should she do there? Old Johanna took faithful care of her, and everything went along smoothly in the little house. Yes, it was very quiet and lonely in the world. Wolf had been absent 3 years, and Ingeborg had not seen him for 2 years. Arnold von Karing had given her tidings of how Wolf passed his time, pleasing, displeasing, singing, and dancing. He had also intimated that Wolf was frequently criticized for his behavior. This he had not done intentionally, but the way and manner sank deeply into Ingeborg's heart. If Wolf does wrong, it is the wicked people at Berlin who were to blame. He is not bad. No, never, I am sure, she would reply. One night, old Peter knocked at Ingeborg's door and said, Come quickly, Frau Eriksson is dying. While the young girl had begged for the privilege of being with Mother Esther when such an event occurred, when the summons came, her blood ceased to circulate and her limbs trembled. But it was not death that had approached the old mother's home. A stroke of paralysis had occurred during the night. Her peculiar breathing had awakened Karin, and now all stood around her, anxious and powerless. At last the doctor arrived. He declared that there was no immediate danger, but was unable to tell when the stroke might return. It was possible she might lie in this condition for many years. Her entire right side was paralyzed, rigid as marble. With foot and arm helpless, mouth drawn, and partial vision only, she could scarcely utter inarticulate sounds. But her mind was clear, and she was perfectly conscious of all that was happening around her. When the physician said she might linger for years, a shadow fell across her wrinkled face, and her eyes filled with tears. How different from what she had prayed and hoped! It is a terrible affliction when a woman of her active nature is obliged to lie passive and helpless. Karin undertook to nurse her mother with great fidelity, but the demands of the business and the house must receive attention. Therefore it happened that Ingeborg sat for hours long by the bedside. She was happy that finally she could be useful to someone. Karin was able to work without, as the mother was in excellent hands. Poor Karin! Her sky was not always bright. Martin had been absent 3 years, and nothing had been heard of him. Even though he were a poor writer, he might have found an opportunity to send one letter. Besides, his father was rather proud, and no doubt would prefer his son to marry a richer girl, although Karin, with her amiable disposition and chest linen, was on no account to be despised. But now a sick mother was no agreeable addition to the dowry. But what could be done? If Martin were only here! Meanwhile, Frau Eriksson and Ingeborg had a lonely, quiet time.
True, one only heard the latter's soft, low voice in response to Mother Esther's glances of expression, which were perfectly understood. Both enjoyed the sacred grove of the Psalms, and like fresh waters, these old songs rustled through the shade. Beyond it, they saw with clear vision the heavenly city, when Ingeborg repeated, "Jerusalem the golden, with milk and honey blessed. Beneath thy contemplation sink heart and voice oppressed. I know not, oh, I know not what social joys are there, what radiancy of glory, what light beyond compare. With jasper glow thy bulwarks, thy streets with emerald blaze. The sardius and the topaz unite in thee their rays. Thy ageless walls are bonded with amethyst unpriced. Thy saints build up its fabric, and the cornerstone is Christ. But it is only sweet to die when the world is no longer attractive, when there is nothing either for us to live or suffer for." Ingeborg had written to Wolf of her mother's illness. He had replied affectionately and expressed his grief, but could give no hope of recovery. He rejoiced that Karin was able to give her so much attention, for Ingeborg had not mentioned herself, and he hoped during the year to pass his final examination and to visit his home, when he should be able to assist in the care of his mother. He had spent a year at Jena and was once more at Berlin, but of his plans, desires, hopes, fears, and the struggles of his heart he said nothing. How could he? These people by the sea belonged to another class, whose aims and necessities were others than his. But love sharpens the understanding. Both women avoided each other's glance after the letter had been read. Neither would betray their apprehensions. Ingeborg sighed. She wished she could rescue Wolf from danger, as indeed he had once saved her life. Now he was in danger, and here sat only a weak, fragile creature.
This is the end of Part 4. Sibylla's story continues, and we will carry on in the next video. Thank you for listening, and remember to subscribe to the channel for more content. See you in Part 5 of Sibylla's story.